So there we go. I just want to remind folks that the session is only scheduled for an hour. The likelihood of us being able to answer every question or speak to every specific situation is unlikely. We will have some links dropped in the chat later throughout the presentation of how you can be in touch with your local business agent if additional questions arise. We do have the chat open. We also have a Q&A section. Business agent Liz Losi, business agent Nick Fry, and Maureen Dunaway, who's the chair of the statewide meet and confer, will also be assisting with answering questions. So please feel free to use the chat and the Q&A to make sure that we get all of those captured. I think I mentioned this in the email, but we'll be using your questions to help develop a frequently asked questions section for the MAPE website. I already covered recording and transcribing. We also have an ASL interpreter here today. They will be spotlighted throughout the session. If you have any issues with acceptability or audio, visuals, anything like that, please let one of us know in the chat and we'll work to resolve it immediately. As you know, we have been meeting with management on a fairly regular basis since late January, and we've been working diligently to provide written updates to you all. If for some reason you have not been receiving those emails, please let us know as soon as possible so that we can make sure that you're on our lists for future communications. Obviously, if you're here today, you understand that Deed VRS is facing a budget deficit and needs to reduce workforce costs by $10.3 million. In an effort to mitigate the situation, management has offered an early retirement incentive as well as voluntary layoffs. Those eligible for the early retirement should have been notified earlier this week, excuse me. Same with voluntary layoffs. This is all in an effort to reduce the number of people who would face a permanent layoff. So today's session is going to cover the seniority roster. Toe is going to help walk us through that. Basically what we're looking at, how to understand it. Following that, David Harth is going to walk us through the layoff procedure. Again, we're not going to be able to cover everything in depth the way that we would like, but please know that all of your local business agents are here to support you throughout this process, and I encourage you to reach out to them anytime. Obviously, most of you have heard from me a lot, so you have my email. You can certainly reach out to me too, and I can help direct you to the proper person. With that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Toe. So Toe, if you're going to go ahead and share your screen, I'll mute myself and start helping with the chat if needed.
Hey, Jen, before you go, I got to leave. I didn't know about this meeting. I'm going to have to leave early. I've got a medical appointment.
That's okay, Rich. Thanks.
Yep, sorry. I can't find it.
Hurry. Quit.
Okay, are you guys able to see my screen? Okay, wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tol Fan. I am the business agent for locals 1301, 1302, and 1303, as well as like the staff for the organizing committee. I'm so sorry just to kind of go through this with you guys in a very, very difficult times in your life here. But I hope that the presentation today or the info session today here is just going to be helpful for you guys just to kind of navigate this very difficult time here. So what I will be covering, as Janelle mentioned, was all right, it's going to be like the seniority rosters, and this is kind of like the minimum thing that you guys have to do is just making sure that everything is accurate. That's all that we're asking you to do is during this difficult time here, just making sure that the minimum work that you do is just making sure that your seniority status is correct and accurate, so that we can kind of proceed with the layoff procedure, which David is going to cover soon here. And I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay, so seniority system started with an attempt by workers to solve the problem of management playing favoritism and discrimination, right? So it helps to kind of eliminate all those things. As you can tell, I mean, coming into the state, like the MAPE contract, what it does really well is eliminating favoritism and discrimination right from the very beginning. Like when you get hired on the pay scale, your step one and so forth, based on obviously your work experience, everything else could be negotiated a little bit there. But this is like central belief of unions that all workers should be treated equally and fairly, right? So this problem of management being in total control is what propelled many workers to form unions in the first place. So think what the workplace would be like if the employer got to decide the following, like who works each day, who gets, which job, how much each worker get paid, who gets overtime, how much vacation a worker gets. And then it also boils down to when do they get to take vacation time off, and who gets laid off, and who gets recalled from the layoff, and so forth, right? So next is we're going to be talking about all the the job classifications within VRS. So some of you may be surprised to know that they are all not rehabilitation counselors or rehabilitation program specialists. We have, VS employees belonging to like other job classifications such as accounting officer, senior, management analyst, and so forth. So as you can tell and stuff like that, there are about like 309 VRS employees in these job classifications, and there are quite a few there. I'm going to go on to the next slide. If I can just move. There we go. And how do I read my seniority roster? This is somewhat like self-explanatory with these headers here. One thing to note is job option is class option in this one, and we're just going to go, like from one section to the next one. So in this example, we have only 2 employees. We have Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse. Again, this is all hypothetical, right? The highlighted rows are the current classification. So everything that's highlighted there, as you can tell, Mickey Mouse is highlighted and with employee ID of 0000 and 1, and Minnie Mouse is 000 and 2. They're active full time. They currently work in the Minneapolis work site, and then there are these like titles here. You got job title, rehabilitation counselor career here. That's the job classification there. Then the bargaining unit's MAPE, and you have the seniority, which is going to be like part of a deed and within MAPE. And then you have like the person, employees, job current and work locations and employment and so forth. And then you get into this one, it's still a continuation of Mickey Mouse's and Minnie Mouse's seniority, and Mickey Mouse job seniority, the classification and so on, which David's going to go through this, thoroughly, like the difference between, classification versus, job option and so forth. But I'm just going to cover, like how to kind of read this. And so the job, classification under this, like this column here. So Mickey Mouse started back on March 16th, 1988. And however, the state seniority date is July 14th, 1980. So when we're looking at the layoff procedure, we're always focusing on classification seniority rather than state seniority. So that is really important, just a big kind of takeaway there. So we're always looking at this classification date here as of March 16th, 1988 versus when Mickey Mouse started working for the state, which was back in 1980. So as you can tell, the job title here under this section, fact seniorities roster here, is you got still the job entry date, which is the classification seniority date here of 1988. And then the job title is rehabilitation counselor career. And then these are then unlimited and classified rather than unclassified, right? no options there. So there isn't any job classification, job options or class options there. And uh, so now, on the other hand, if you look at Minnie Mouse's classification within like the rehabilitation counselor career, and the classifications, seniority date of August 11th, 1992, right? And then her seniority date here is 1988. So if you look at specifically the classification seniority, Mickey Mouse has a higher seniority status than Minnie Mouse because Mickey Mouse started back in 1988 versus 1992. So fortunately for Minnie Mouse, she has a higher classification seniority than Donald Duck, Daffy Duck, Goofy, and Pluto, which I didn't include here. But this is kind of like a discussion on the seniority rosters, and I just wanted to kind of help you, guide you along the way there to just kind of read this a little bit better. If there are any questions, we can certainly answer them at the end of the presentation here. I know that we going to cover like a lot and stuff like that. And David's section is going to be next on the layoff procedure. So whenever you're ready there, David.
Thanks, Toe. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that? Great. So covering the layoff procedures under Article 17 of the CBA today, I want to just make sure that we're going to all be on the same page about what this presentation is and what we're going to be able to cover. So I want people to understand some key terms and definitions that are not normal language that people generally use. So, and again, before we start, we are going to be able to provide a link at the end of this that if you want to review this presentation again, this has been done a number of times with other employee populations, so you can access it at any time. So again, reviewing and understanding key terms and definitions under Article 17. We want you to be able to digest a little bit of what the layoff procedures are. So I see a bunch of questions in the chat about bumping. We are going to be able to cover that. I'm going to ask that if there is any questions that for me that people want to raise hands and ask, please wait until the end, just so that we can get through all of these different kind of definitions and processes together. We also want to make sure that you understand where Article 17 interacts with other areas of the contract. Many of our articles do not exist as silos. They relate to other areas and kind of have that interplay together. So we want to make sure that people are comfortable and knowledgeable about that. Okay. Before we go any further, we just want to make sure that people understand that this is a process that is initiated by the employer. I think pretty much everybody here probably understands that. This is a budgetary situation that is causing these layoffs. There are other situations that do also cause layoffs. Layoffs themselves are not just eliminations of positions, but if you are reduced in hours for 10 days or more, that meets the definition of a layoff under Article 17. Your statewide meet and confer, chaired by Maureen Dunaway, has been engaging with management along with Janaea Ariano to talk about budgetary planning. But when these sorts of things do happen, we also engage with management to see if there are other options that we can agree to that would then mitigate or avoid layoffs altogether. For example, the early retirement incentives or the voluntary layoff pieces are part of that discussion that we've had with management. We do not know all of the details until the actual layoff letters have been issued. If management is doing their job, and I hope that they are in this case, when somebody receives a layoff notice, there should be all of the options that are available to somebody listed on that letter. Sometimes no options are going to be listed, meaning that the accepting of vacancies or bumping other employees or claiming or anything like that is just not an option through the layoffs, depending on how long you've been with the state and how long you've been in your particular classification. As we talked about earlier, we do want to make sure that the seniority rosters are accurate, so please do check the seniority rosters, and I see that somebody had put a link to those for VRS in the chat. If you are interested, you can also check Article 15 of the contract where it talks about seniority. If there are inaccuracies, please reach out to your human resources department. Even though we do have an appeal process outlined in Article 15, inaccuracies of fact, which means that if the dates are wrong, maybe the title of the classification is incorrect, those can be corrected and appealed at any particular time of the year. Just so people know, this is a presentation that we've been giving to a lot of different parties. So covering specific circumstances, meaning that if somebody wants to talk through their own specific layoff circumstance, we're just not going to be able to deal with that today. Going forward, once we have the idea of the layoff notices being sent out, I believe it's on March 31st, please work with your local stewards. Your business agents also will be reaching out to folks that have been impacted in their own territories, so that we're not missing everybody, or I'm sorry, anybody. But as presently, we know that no layoff notices have yet been issued right now. Okay, so getting to some key terminology and definitions. We operate our layoff procedures pursuant to your seniority unit. A seniority unit is essentially your agency. The reason that we keep these kind of specific to that agency is that we want to be able to limit the sprawl that these things can sometimes take effect on. So limiting it to an agency means that we're trying to mitigate this from going outside of that agency and creating kind of a catastrophic domino effect that would include almost every single agency in the whole entire state. You can look for your seniority unit in the back of the contract in Appendix D. For deed, though, we know that deed is one single seniority unit, and it is a statewide seniority unit. So looking through the layoff processes themselves, it actually does increase the number of options that you would have available to you if you are facing the unfortunate circumstance of the layoff. As Toe went through in the seniority roster review, we break up seniority into a couple different areas. One is your statewide seniority, which is how you accumulate time, just your longevity with the state, and that's calculated from your most recent date of hire. But the classification seniority is going to be the key piece of this, because when we see layoffs, it's based on the classifications themselves. It's not based on your overall statewide seniority that we calculate the rights of either taking a vacancy or having the option to possibly bump other employees. Classification and class option, you may have a different working title with VRS and deed. Your classification is what is going to be located in semaphore, and things like rehabilitation counselor career. Those are the titles, the classifications that we use that are located in the middle of the contract that have specific wage grids associated with them. Some classifications have what's called a class option, which is a specialization for a particular classification. We see this a lot in the ITS series. So ITS 3/database administrator, that database administrator would be the class option. It's also important to know if you have this, because even though you may have the classification of rehabilitation counselor, if you have that class option, the effect of that is really it creates a completely different classification series with that class option. And I'm going to get to that when we start going through the procedures themselves. Kind of talked a little bit about layoff letters already. Those are the notices that management will be sending to the affected employees. For employees, they have to give at least a 21-day notice to affected employees. I do believe in this case we are getting 30 days notice, which is better. Now, the at-risk letters are associated with the layoff letters, but these are letters that are sent to employees who may possibly be bumped through the layoff process. So, for instance, if you have a more senior person with higher level classification seniority than somebody that is either within 35 or outside of 35 miles, those folks would be receiving an at-risk letter saying that a more senior person in the classification is receiving a layoff letter and they may possibly bump you. The layoff procedures themselves are for the classified service. We do represent a number of people in the unclassified service, though. For most agencies, it is very de minimis, the number of unclassified folks that we have. However, in Minnesota State, so the state colleges and universities, the vast majority of people that we do represent are unclassified, and we have a separate process called a reduction in force for them. So they are not eligible to go through the layoff procedures as outlined in Article 17, Section 4. Claiming is another step in the layoff process. It's not an option through the procedure, however. Claiming means that you would be looking at positions that are outside of your seniority unit or outside of your agency that a different agency may deem you to be qualified for and would allow you to have a slight upper hand in possibly getting an interview for that other position. Those do need to be vacancies, however, in those other agencies for the claiming to be utilized. Employment condition is a Fair Labor Standards Act term. All of that means is that are you full-time or are you part-time? That's what employment condition means. Prior notice, I already kind of talked about that. It's 21 calendar days at the very least to employees. We obviously want to get as much advance notice as possible so that we can explore every option, unturn every single rock that we possibly can to hopefully mitigate or avoid the impact on people's lives. And the last one is decision day. Decision day is a managerial authorized date that can be at least 7 days prior to the effective date of the layoff, meaning that the employee has to decide which option that is available to them to take. So if you are going to claim a vacancy, or you're going to bump an employee, or if you're going to accept the layoff, those are all things that will be done on the decision day or even prior to the decision day. Okay, to the layoff process itself. So this is a contractual procedure. It's been negotiated and agreed to by all parties. So this is something that we're not going to utilize to tell management to stop this. It is something that people will, once management has initiated, lead through so that we can explore again those options for people to hopefully avoid them losing their job. The concept of the layoff process is that we want to start local so that we're mitigating that ripple effect outwards to start including a lot more people that may not have actually received the layoff notice in the first place. So the more local we keep it, the less impactful and the less pain that there's going to be that is going to then spread out to other individuals. It's a complex process, so if you don't have every single understanding of the layoff process after today, that is just fine. It takes a long time to really know how the layoff works and also to be asking the right questions. Like I said, we will be providing a link to everybody at the end of this presentation so that if you want to go back and hear this again, that you will be able to do so at your convenience. I've taken the liberty to break up the layoff process into 3 different sections so that we can think about them as groups. It's just a more digestible way than if we're looking at all of the different options all the way through as a whole. Let's take them piece by piece, and hopefully people will be a little bit more comfortable with them at the end of this than they were at the beginning. And we also have the ability, and Janaea has done an excellent job at this, along with Maureen and your Meet and Confer team, to engage with management to discover other options that we have that will mitigate the overall impact into the people that may not, A, be eligible for the early retirement incentive, or be at the position within their career to think that a voluntary layoff is going to be something that's going to be acceptable for them. There are other things that we can negotiate, however. When we meet with them, and this is all contained in Article 17 as well, we talk about the length of the layoff notice. I know for this one, we are expecting it to be a permanent layoff. If there's other job or training opportunities that we can, help get funding for the impacted employees, we can also talk about that at the Meet and Confer. If there's other alternate placement methods that maybe we have not explored at this point, we will also engage with them on that. Early retirement options, voluntary layoff, voluntary reduction in hours or furloughs, and talking about other options, maybe to reach out to EAP so that people can kind of work through their own individual situations. Okay, so as I said, I broke this up into 3 different groups. So getting to group 1, this is really to be thought of as this is the most localized and closest to me area to mitigate the impact of a layoff from spreading out and creating that kind of domino effect. So it starts only with the affected employee. So the first option is that you look for a vacancy in your current classification and class option in the same employment condition. So if there's a vacancy in the rehab counselor series, the person who's receiving that layoff notice, and again, it's in the same employment condition, part-time or full-time, they would then take that vacancy, again, not impacting anybody at that time. If that is not an option, that's when we start to see the domino effect happen. The second option in this first grouping then is to bump the least senior person in your same class option, and employment condition. If you do have a class option, again, I'll use the ITS series just as an example. If I'm an ITS 3/database administrator, there may be a vacancy in the ITS 3 classification that I could feasibly be qualified for. Just because I'm a database administrator probably doesn't mean that I'm unqualified to just be an ITS 3. Or there might be a different class option that the employer would deem myself to be qualified to perform. If that is not available from this first group, then we can accept a vacancy in a previously held classification. Okay, so we're starting with the same classification class option, vacancy. Second option would be to bump the least senior person in the same class option and employment condition. And then if that's not available, then we would look at a previously held class. So in TOE's presentation on the seniority roster, it lists your current classification and then the previous classifications that you have served. Again, that's the important part that we really want people to check for accuracy so that those dates are going to match up and that you're going to be able to rely on that particular seniority accrual that you have in those previous classifications. Now, if that's not available, then we have a layoff. You can choose to have a layoff at this time, or we can look at the options that are going to be in the second group. Now, these are not step-by-step considerations that we have to take, but it is a list of options that people can think about and explore. Again, all of these options, whatever is going to be contained in Article 17, should be listed on your layoff letter once you receive it. So the second group is still within the 35 miles, but again, we are creating a domino effect at this point. So looking within that 35-mile radius from where your work site is, so your permanent work location, is to bump the least senior employee in an equal class or a lower class that you have previous served. Again, we're looking at the previous classifications. Second option would be to accept a vacancy in the lower class that you have served in, class option again. Third option is to bump a temporary employee that has at least 30 days left on their temporary assignment. Temporary employees do not have access to this particular process, so if that is the situation, that temporary employee would unfortunately be separated from employment with the state. The fourth option in the second group is to bump an employee in a previously held class that is in a different employment condition, meaning full-time to part-time or vice versa, part-time to full-time. Then we're getting, if none of those options, looking at outside of 35 miles. And you can start to see that this is a pattern, right? What we're doing is trying to find the vacancies so that we can minimize impact on other employees. If that, however, does not exist, and you are a more senior person, you do have the right to bump those folks, both within that 35 miles, but then also outside of that 35 miles. So the first option in the third grouping is to accept the vacancy in the same, equal, or lower class that you have previously served in, or could be deemed qualified to perform. And then the second option in that is, again, to bump the least senior person in that same, equal, or lower class that an employee has previously served in. If none of those options exist, however, then a layoff would be effective. This is the end of the layoff process. Now, as we go through group one, that is where we see the language of shall. So if you're receiving a layoff notice and you are looking at that first grouping of options, the employee needs to review that and ensure that if it's offered to you, either the vacancy or the bumping, the employee needs to take one of those options. After that point, however, after we get out of that first grouping, it is optional to consider those other aspects. It will not impact your ability to have unemployment insurance or to be placed on the layoff list for possible recall in the future. Now, just kind of mentioned recall. So when we see a layoff, the point is not to keep people in permanent layoff, but we want to get them back into the seniority unit and back with a job. So there are a few different seniority lists that you can have your name placed on. Now, the first one, the seniority unit layoff list, is something that you are placed on automatically. So you don't need to actually make any request in order to be placed on the seniority unit layoff list. This will include folks that I had kind of referenced before, even if they have not permanently lost their job, they have been reduced in their hours, and that reduction in hours has happened for at least 10 days. Also, demotions in lieu of layoff. So if you're looking at the previous classification and you take that job, you're still going to be placed on the layoff list because you had been removed from your current classification. That is the class that you would possibly be recalled to in the future if there are vacancies. The department layoff list, this is only applicable to DOC, DHS, and Minnesota State. And in those cases, the employee needs to request their name to be placed on that sort of layoff list. We have two more. One is the bargaining unit layoff list. So kind of MAPE-wide in the same classification that you are being laid off from. Again, you need to request your name to be placed on these. And then there's the bargaining unit layoff list, alternate classification, where, again, you need to request your name to be placed on this. This would be for classifications that you were not laid off from, but you would possibly be qualified to perform, or previously held classifications that you had done work in. Names on the layoff list will remain on the layoff list for at least 1 year and up to 4 years. The reason that we have that is that we do layoffs in inverse order of seniority. So conceptually, the least senior person would be getting the layoff notices first before we have impact on the higher level or the more senior employees that we have. But this is a time frame. So for instance, if I'm just past probation and I'm receiving a layoff list, my name or a layoff notice, my name will remain on that list for at least 1 year. And then if maybe I'm a longer term employee, even over 4 years, the name will remain on the list for 4 years as a cap. So how does Article 17 interact with other areas of the contract? So when we initiate layoffs, your vacation and your severance pay is going to be liquidated in cash. It will not be moved into the healthcare savings plan governed by MSRS. Obviously, when people are losing their job, we want to have more cash in our pockets than if it's just going to be sitting in an account for us to use later. So the vacation is liquidated up to 260 hours. If there are more than 260 hours and you are recalled, you are going to be credited with the difference between 260 and what your last accrual rate was, or I'm sorry, your last accrual was looking like. So if I had 300 hours, I would be credited upon re-entry to the state with those 40 hours of vacation time. Severance pay is going to be based on your sick leave. So we, in the case of people being eligible for severance, you get 40% of the first 900 accrued but unused sick hours, and then 12.5% of every hour after that. I think a lot of people do think that, in traditional parlance of I get my severance package. That is not what this is. This is not a severance package. This is solely based on what accruals you have in your sick leave bank. Transition leave under Article 14, so our leaves of absences, there may be up to 80 hours of transition leave authorized by the employer. I am not clear on whether or not DEED VRS has authorized this, but apparently you're going to be paid for 80 hours, but what your responsibility would be is not to perform your actual job duties, but essentially to be doing more job search activities. Probationary, non-certification, those things, and the trial period, once recall, those things are going to, the trial period would be possible for people moving into other positions. and the probationary period, non-certification, those things would apply as they would if you were just entering state service as well. Your employer will continue to pay your health insurance premiums, at least their portion of what it is. You will be responsible for your side of the premiums. For individual coverage, that would be 5% of the overall premiums, and for family, it would be 15% of the overall premium on a monthly basis. You do have to be employed with the employer for at least 3 years in order to enjoy this benefit, however. And that continued payment would last for up to 6 months. As I kind of talked about at the beginning, there are other resources that are going to be available to you. So unemployment insurance, that's the purpose of this. And speaking to a number of DEED employees, I probably don't need to educate you on unemployment insurance. You could do that for me. EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, is available to everybody. I believe you get up to 3 free counseling sessions with anybody at EAP. There is a Displaced Workers Program. I would encourage people if they are looking to discover or get some help with their resume, you can go to a career force center, get some help there, and you can always, again, use the MAPE website. So I believe this recording is going to be placed on the MAPE website. And again, we're going to provide a link to everybody either in the chat or I think maybe being sent out via email to everyone if they wanted to review this recording or one of the other sessions that we've done again. If all of this is confusing and it's just overwhelming, we also do have a flow chart. If you're a visual learner, I know that I am. It's in the back of the contract that kind of takes, again, from the impetus of layoff and kind of leads you down through a flow chart so that you can see how your options might play out. We also want to make sure that people are connected to their stewards, their regional steward directors, their regional directors, your business agents. There is no reason that anybody should be doing this by themselves and alone. We do receive the layoff notices from the employer when they are sent. That's pursuant to a contractual obligation by the employer. But if there are questions or even if people just need to talk to somebody to walk through some options, please reach out and make sure that this is not happening in silence. Okay, I know I kind of flew through that. So I'm going to rely on my colleagues to say if there's any specific questions that we need answering through this. I see I have 73 messages in the chat, so I'm not going to go through all of those right now, but if there's anything that people want to ask me, please feel free. Stop sharing now.
Just a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the raise hand feature.
I guess I'll just interject here because I saw a lot of messages about the bumping. Do people feel comfortable with what bumping is and is not at this point?
David, I saw some questions a couple times about if somebody bumps to a lower counselor level position, would that be automatically reallocated upward? And there is some language in the contract about junior senior plans and how you'd be automatically moved back to the senior position if you bumped a junior position. I'm not sure if the counselors would be treated the same way or not. That would be, maybe that's a takeaway that we have to look into.
That would not be part of an expectation through the layoff procedure itself. It would have to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. And reallocations upward, I don't think anybody should have the understanding that it's automatic, but we would have to review an individual circumstance to see if that's going to be applicable.
Thanks. That's probably the most common question I've seen.
Okay.
Hannah, do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could go back and talk a little bit more about group number 3 scenario where bumping could go outside of that 35-mile radius. So I was a little bit confused if that would actually be reality for some people.
Sure, I'll share my screen again just so people know what we're talking about. Come on. All right, so this is that third grouping. This is that third area. So essentially what this particular, when we're looking at this particular option, it's going to mirror what was existing inside 35 miles. It's just, again, to try to think of other options that people might have available to them based on that classification seniority. So the same way that it did within those 35 miles, there are different options inside the 35 miles, but these are mirrored outside of 35 miles as well. Again, is to accept a vacancy in the current class that you have. So really looking statewide, most people, they are, a little reticent. If I work in St. Paul, then I find a vacancy in Duluth, that I'm going to be taking that as an option. But your own individual circumstance will dictate that for yourself. But again, accepting a vacancy in your current class, an equal class, or a lower class that you have served in previously, that will all be contained on the seniority roster itself. So all of the classifications that you have served in since your most recent date of hire will be included on that seniority roster. And then that second option is, if those vacancies do not exist, that if there are least senior, the less senior employees than you, that you would be willing to bump out of their position, again, in that same equal or lower classification in which you served. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And just as a follow-up, so each group, the group 1, 2, and 3 that you went through, these are all very real possibilities. So it's not like deciding 1, 2, or 3. It's all 3 of them could potentially happen.
Correct.
Okay.
And if human resources and your employer is doing the job that they should be doing, each individual circumstance should be explored as an individual circumstance and saying, okay, for David, let's look at what his classification is, what other classes he's served in, and see if there's other areas in which he could either accept the vacancy or bump other employees. And again, apart from that group 1 area where it states that employee shall make a selection from those first couple options, the options after that are that they are optional. So if you do not have options within those first groups, but there might be other options, but in a lot of circumstances, I've seen people that don't want to bump other employees. Again, I'm not saying there's no value judgment there, but they just have said for themselves, I don't feel comfortable impacting another employee, even though I'm receiving a layoff, that accepting the layoff is a preferable option for them. Again, outside of those first 2 options, everything is optional.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mike.
Hey, so when you get a layoff notice, I'm glad that you're covering that, because I've been trying to imagine that too. When you get a layoff notice, obviously, if there's options out there for you, they list that out, or they should be. In your past experience observing this with other departments, have you heard of like HR having like office hours that you can connect with them to talk about options, or anything like that?
If you have questions, I would say beat that door down if they're not even listing office hours. It would be, I think, really a lack of humanity if people are like sending out notices and just saying, well, there you go. We'll see you later. Good luck with everything. These are uncomfortable situations. They are unfortunate situations. And kind of in my before we get started area, we need to be in constant communication. And I know that Janaea and Maureen and your Meet and Confer team have been doing everything that they possibly can to mitigate these effects on people. In many cases, they are unavoidable, unfortunately. So if you're not getting a response from human resources, I would say employ every single possible way that you can to communicate that to them. If you're not getting any answers, make sure that we know about it because we'll also start pounding down that door as well.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I think I saw Joseph first, or Joseph, you want to go ahead?
Yes. I have a question that in the last couple of days we have a meeting with the admin, and they mentioned about ERI about 55 plus, and then they also mentioned about 50 plus as well. Do you hear anything about that?
I'm gonna have to turn that over to Janaea, because I have not been working through that particular process for VRS.
Thanks for the question, Joseph. No, all documentation has indicated that you must be 55 or older, which would then make you eligible through MSRS. So anything that the eligibility requirements for early retirement are defined by the general plan, which is through MSRS. So if I'm assuming they said that to you verbally, is that correct?
No, I mean they did talk in the meeting, but they're not that much. I think that she mentioned about 55 plus, but not have enough the people to choose the option for early retirement, and then they will go down to 50, and then they stop right there. That's why I thought that there might be something that we don't know that about that.
I've not heard anything about that, but I can certainly follow up if needed.
Please,
Okay, will do.
thank you.
Okay, Pete Pamorin, your hand up.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I'm wondering about the vacancy when you say claiming a vacancy. I know the early retirement stuff that went out stated that anybody taking an early retirement would need to be able that caseload would need to be absorbed somewhere. It would need to create a vacancy that could be vacant for at least a year, right? That was one of the criteria in there. So when you're saying vacancy to claim a vacancy, tell me what that might look like.
If you are talking about kind of a vacancy in your current classification, we would have to look at just the unoccupied positions that are currently budgeted for within the agency. And if nobody is occupying that and you are receiving that layoff notice, you would be awarded the vacancy. So nobody is occupying that, but it has a PCN number and it has been budgeted for so that you could take that particular vacancy. Claiming is a different option. That would be looking outside your seniority unit at other positions that a different agency would then determine whether you would be qualified to perform. But when we're talking about vacancies as one of the options, it's just an unoccupied position, but it does have a PCN and it is budgeted for. Does that answer the question?
So then, well, yes, I guess my hang up comes from the language at the ERI that says that those taking early retirement, that position has to be then able to be vacant for a year. How does that connect? That wouldn't be a vacancy then, correct?
I'm not entirely clear on that particular provision. It is outside of the Article 17 process. So what you're saying is that if somebody is taking an ERI, that their work would be absorbed by a different position and that creates a vacancy for at least a year. I'm not clear on how that would work. That might be something that we need to follow
Yeah,
up.
I'm not sure either.
Okay. Okay. Janaea, do you have any insight on
Yeah.
that?
I was just going to say, I think what the MOU is saying, one, they're offering this because they are anticipating a long-term budget deficit. So they have already determined that these positions being eliminated will be gone for at a minimum of 12 months. So that was one of the requirements within the MOU. Does that help answer the question? They've determined that they will not be filled within 12 months.
Okay, so it's
Right.
more
So
about the
that would not be
longevity.
considered a vacancy.
Correct. So when the positions are eliminated, again, it doesn't meet that same criteria of having a PCN and being budgeted for,
Okay.
because those positions would then be unfunded.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for the question. Stasia. Oh, she just went away.
I did actually see Stasia ask the question that if there are individuals on probation, are they laid off automatically?
So when the employer determines that a layoff is going to happen, they need to communicate the number of positions and the length of a layoff, amongst some other things. So probationary employees would be the least senior employees in that classification. So conceptually, they would be receiving the layoff notices first. It is not automatic because if you take a look at the agency as a whole, this is impacting VRS as a subset of the agency. So that doesn't mean that all of the probationary employees in a different division or a different subset are going to be receiving the layoff notices. However, they would probably be going to be receiving the at-risk letters that they could possibly be bumped because they are least senior in this other area. So even though we do this by inverse order of seniority, it's inverse order of seniority of the impacted area, not inverse seniority of all employees within the agency. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
so, sorry, I was on mute, but I was just wondering, do you guys know what positions they are targeting for eliminating the positions and like how many classifications are cutting and how many people?
Yes, we do.
Can you share that?
Yeah. Do we? I don't think we have all of the specific names, but we have the number of positions and what number in each classification there are.
But
I don't
not
have.
for elimination. I think that's what she's asking, David.
I'm
Like
sorry, say
what
that again.
positions? How many of each classification? So like how many counselors do they plan to do? How many rehab reps? How many people in middle management?
Pursuant to the processes, we get what is being eliminated in our unit. So we
Okay.
don't necessarily know about managerial positions that are being eliminated.
Yep.
There is statutory language that it needs to be essentially, if you have, say, 100 employees in our unit, and then there is a smaller contingent in management, needs to be, I'm blanking on the word, but it needs to be proportional to those
Yeah.
areas. Yeah, but for our unit, I think the number was what, 309 overall positions.
But David, she's asking about elimination. We don't yet know which positions they are looking to eliminate. We don't have any of that information yet. We don't know who they're targeting because they're still in the process of offering the early retirement incentive and the voluntary layoff in an effort to reduce the overall number of permanent layoffs. We do have another meeting scheduled with management on March 19th, so next week, where we anticipate getting some updated numbers to figure out where exactly we're sitting. And we will communicate that out just as we have done before, as soon as that meeting has passed. So no, we do not. Go ahead.
Yeah. Can you guys make sure that when you do
I'm sorry, I lost your audio.
can you hear me?
It's very faint.
Oh. I just said
Oh, there you go.
if when you guys do have that that meeting with management, can you let us know? Like so we can start preparing.
Yes. So like I
Okay.
said, we're meeting on the 19th, and just like we've done after previous meetings, we'll type up everything we know and we'll share it out as soon as possible. But we will not get specific names. And I'm not even sure what information will be shared at that point, but whatever we do learn, we will communicate it out as soon as possible.
Thanks, Janelle. I think, Mike, you were next.
Sorry about that. I was responding to a message. For process of inverse seniority roster, Do you know, because okay, so there's rehab counselors and then counselor senior and then career counselor. Do you know if they had followed that order um when making decisions?
Yeah, it would be the people that would receive the notice in the order that they would receive the notice would be the least senior person in those classifications. So that is a class series. So they have to identify the positions in each one of those areas. So if I was hired at a senior level and I didn't just have the counselor classification, I might be the least senior person in that classification seniority, and I probably wouldn't have the ability to go back to a lower class. Same would be true if I was hired at a career level. I'm not sure or certain whether that would happen, but just for kind of discussion's sake, it's the least senior person in each classification, not
Okay.
in the series itself.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Joseph, yes, you were next.
Yep, I have two questions. I have two questions. The first question is, for example, if I'm eligible for the 55 plus, an option of the ERI, and I choose an option not to retire, and then the date already passed, the next step will be the layoff, the send out the letter. Do that group of people will be receive the letter of layoff, or they will send out the letter for people on low seniority? And that is my first question. And my second question is, do you know that how many percentage in, for example, rehab prep, uh, uh, counselor senior, counselors, senior counselor, career counselor, the specialist, and how many percentage that they will take out from each of the group of the position?
Janelle?
We don't know the percentage. I hope we'll have more information on the 19th about how folks will be affected or which classifications will be impacted, but we don't yet have that information. And I just want to make sure that I understood your first question about early retirement. So if you're eligible and you decide not to take it and then layoff notices come, will that still be in the seniority order? And I believe the answer would be yes. But David, can you confirm your understanding as well?
Yes. If the selection is to not take the ERI, then you would still have we'd rely on the classification seniority that you've built within that, and depending on where you're sitting, those options may or may not be available to you. So again, we'll have to take. We don't really know the individual circumstance until we look at and we receive the layoff notices. Thank you for that question, though. Liz.
I was raising my hand for Clarissa. So Clarissa, go ahead, hop in, hon.
Thanks. For some reason I don't have the option to raise my hand. I was a little bit confused. The part where it talks about bumping and when we're looking at class, there was language in there that said or otherwise deemed qualified. So
Right.
the rumor mill in VRS, we've all been talking about this for weeks, is I've heard career counselors can bump senior counselors. But then someone told me, well, only if they've been a senior counselor before. But technically, they would still be qualified to do that job. So can career counselors bump senior or not?
If we're going through the layoff procedures themselves, it would be if you have that previous classification seniority built within your seniority roster. So if I've served in a senior position and I have classification built up, that's when the bumping may happen. Deemed qualified would really be related to the class option area. So again, if we have a specialization, let's take the career counselor example with I believe I've seen the signing job option or class option. Theoretically, they would still be available and eligible and qualified to take the career position without the class option. But we're not going to see kind of if I don't have the classification seniority of bumping people outside of that.
Okay, thank you.
They'll
That
have to go
helps.
through, they'll have to rely on the classification seniority itself.
Okay. The only reason I ask that is because there's only like 30 of us senior counselors, and there's just trying to mentally prepare.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. It can't just be the Wild West though, right? So if I'm in a career position and I just kind of look out and I say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm a career and you're a senior and I can do your job, so I'm going to take your position," um, and I don't have that, that's not going to happen.
I'm just looking at the time and want to be mindful that folks likely have to get back to work. Please continue to send in questions to either me or your local business agent, Maureen as Deed Meet and Confer Chair, anyone else on the team that you know. We will continue to communicate as much as possible anytime we learn something new. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll work with our amazing comm staff to get this video up on the Deed Meet and Confer page as soon as possible. I'm going to end the meeting in about 1 minute. Thanks, everyone.
See one more hand up. Steve Emery.
Yes, I'm just wondering if my current position is career rehabilitation counselor. Can a manager bump me? They're not in the same classification, I don't believe, but they could possibly do my job. Would they be able to bump me?
You would have had to
Yep.
have held it, right, Jeanette?
Correct. They would have to have classification seniority built up that is greater than yours in the career classification.
Exactly.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand, so if they've had previous experience that's greater than mine, that would give them the option to bump?
Possibly. We would have to really look at your specific situation. Again, we don't know the specific circumstances or ability to kind of explore every hypothetical until we actually see the notices and understand what individual circumstances are going to bring. So just by the mere fact that they are a manager and say, yeah, I could do Steve's job, but if they don't have the classification seniority that is greater than yours, they do not have the right to come in and bump you. And that's actually, you're bringing up an important point here, is that we do see people exit their own bargaining unit and move into other bargaining units if they have classification seniority in classes represented by MMA or AFSCME. So the seniority unit it remains within the agency, but many times people have, they come into state service, they're in an AFSCME position, they get promoted into MAPE or from MAPE into MMA. But if they don't have the classification seniority, they do not have a right to bump other individuals by the mere fact that they may be in a position that is symbolically above another position.
Yeah, and just to clarify, that class seniority would have to be in the position that they were bumping. They couldn't say they've got seniority as a manager and can bump you. It would have to be that they were more senior to you in the position that you hold.
Thank you, Ray.
Okay, thank you. I would have to chew this over to really understand it, but thank you.
And Chandra.
I was just going to quickly comment, Steve, and Steve, feel free to reach out if you want to chat more about it. But because you have signing skill too, it would need to be a manager who had longer seniority than you in the career counselor position and who also had signing skills.
Correct. With the class option, again, it
Right.
almost creates it's a brand new classification. So if you don't have the class option, you can't bump into a class option.
Right.
If you're in a class option and you're deemed qualified, you could look at vacancies or other positions that maybe don't have the class option and be deemed qualified to take them. But with the class option, we need to pay attention to them kind of as a whole of the class option itself.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting now. Thank you again, everyone, and we'll work to get this video on the website as soon as possible. Thanks. Thanks, Jennifer.